All right, let's jump right into this. Think of the human body for a second, not just as, flesh and bone, but as an ancient, incredibly advanced architectural structure. And according to the absolutely fascinating source materials we're unpacking in today's explainer, this structure has been compromised. The original blueprints of our biology were actually designed for profound spiritual connection, but environmental and physiological factors have essentially barricaded the doors. So today, we're looking at a pretty radical framework, one that treats spirituality not as some abstract, ethereal poetry, but as a hard science, literally an engineering problem. We are going to explore how the authors of these texts suggest we can forcefully reclaim this compromised architecture using a highly precise, ancient protocol. Now, you might be wondering if we're just getting bogged down in mechanics here, but our sources explicitly warn us not to get lost in the techniques themselves. They note, the scaffolding is not the building. But to actually get into the building, the sources argue that we have to move way past the sort of devotional fluff that we so often associate with modern spirituality, and step right into the gritty, biological reality of spiritual encounters. If you've ever felt like you're just, going through the motions, this explainer promises to map out the literal, physiological barriers holding you back, and exactly how the text suggests we can shatter them. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our investigative briefing file for today. First, we'll cover the mineral enclosure. Second, the anatomy of the temple. Third, the Hagah Hammer. And finally, opening the Christ door. Starting with Section 1, the mineral enclosure, which is basically a biological blockade. Welcome to the crime scene, everyone. We really have to completely reframe how we view our connection to the divine here. The sources argue that failing to hear or experience the divine isn't necessarily a failure of your faith. It's actually a biological and engineering problem that is occurring right inside your skull. And the absolute focal point of this biological problem is the pineal gland. The text redefines this gland in incredibly stark, biblical terms. They're stripping away all those ethereal, New Age metaphors you've probably heard, and they map the pineal gland directly to the biological sixth seal of Revelation. Anatomically, it sits at the exact geometric center of the cranial vault. It is a highly vascularized transducer, meaning it literally translates external signals, like light, into internal biochemical rhythms, like your melatonin production. But because of its unique placement in blood flow, it is incredibly vulnerable. Here's why it's so vulnerable. Because the pineal gland sits outside the blood-brain barrier, it's exposed to high concentrations of literally whatever is circulating in our bloodstream. Environmental toxins, particularly fluoride, act as the builders of a literal mineral enclosure. See, fluoride is highly electronegative and it actively seeks out calcium. It forms these calcium fluoride complexes that integrate right into the gland as hydroxyapatite crystals. Honestly, think of it like plaque hardening on your teeth, but it's happening right in the center of your brain. Combine that with heavy metals and the suppression of melatonin from all the artificial blue light we stare at, and this creates a pathological, stony shell. Biologically speaking, this shell blocks the gland's function, and according to this framework, completely blocks divine encounter. Just to put this into perspective and show you the severity of the threat, look at this number. Studies cited in our sources reveal that the calcified foci of the pineal gland can contain fluoride concentrations up to 21,000 milligrams per kilogram. 21,000. For context, normal muscle tissue has about 1 milligram per kilogram. 1. So this isn't just a slight buildup we're talking about. It is a massive, heavy mineral barricade literally calcifying the center of the brain. Moving right along to Section 2, Anatomy of the Temple, the blueprint of biology. So how does this whole biological barricade actually fit into the broader spiritual picture? The texts propose a wildly fascinating concept here. They argue that the architecture of Solomon's temple is the exact architecture of human biology, and we're talking a zone-for-zone correlation. The outer court, which is the place of the bronze altar where sacrifice begins, that maps to the pelvis and the legs. The holy place, where the lampstand burns, corresponds to the chest and the heart. And the Holy of Holies, that most sacred inner chamber where the presence dwells, that is the cranial vault, the skull. The sources then cross-reference the 7 seals of Revelation and the 7 ancient churches directly with our endocrine centers. For example, take the 4th seal. That maps to the thymus gland in the heart, which corresponds to the church of Thyatira. And its specific blockage? Corrupted intimacy. Then you have the 6th seal, mapping to the pineal gland in the brow, corresponding to the Church of Philadelphia. Its blockage is intellectual pride and literal physical calcification. The text really insists these aren't just pretty metaphors, these are precise engineering specifications of our internal sanctification roadmap. Now, what's really interesting about this concept of acoustic wave propagation is that you have to look at the human head as an internal tuning fork. When you vocalize or hum, you are creating a mechanical acoustic vibration. This sonic massage directly impacts your central nervous system. It increases nitric oxide, it dampens the vagus nerve, and it mechanically vibrates the spinal fluid. Sound is literally the physical tool that interacts with our biology. Which brings us right into section 3, the Hagah Hammer, a tactical weapon. Because if we have a physical, mineralized blockage in the brain, right, well then we need a physical force to break it. Enter the ancient Hebrew concept of Hagah. While a lot of people just translate this as meditate, the roots of this word go so much deeper. Hagah actually means to murmur, to ponder, to utter softly, kind of like a low fire that never quite goes out. In the text, it's described as a lion rumbling and growling over its prey. It is a highly active, vocal, and visceral engagement, and this immediately contrasts with our modern ideas of silent, empty mind meditation. Hagah requires active kinetic participation. Let's sharply contrast the two right here. On one side, you have the passive hum, like the yogic Brahmarari breath. That produces a very high-pitched nasal vibration meant to calm the nervous system and encourage detachment. But the Hagah growl, entirely different beast. It is a low-pitched, guttural roar coming from the very back of the throat. It is specifically designed to aggressively vibrate the skull and mechanically shake that cerebral spinal fluid. The intent here is absolutely not just to relax, but to literally shatter the stony shell of calcification using acoustic resonance. The sources actually turn this abstract theology into a replicable, kinetic procedure. They call it the Midnight Watch Protocol. And it's designed to be performed at 3 a.m., which is exactly when melatonin levels peak. Step 1 is the consecrated fast. This involves using iodine and boron during the day to purge those toxic halides like fluoride. Step 2 requires sitting upright in total darkness. That's absolutely crucial to prevent any ambient blue light from shutting down the pineal gland. Step 3 is a deep nasal inhalation, where you visualize a blinding white gold brilliance entering the head. And finally, step 4 is the Hagah exhale, that low, guttural, vibrating growl, muttering a sacred phrase to mechanically savage the calcification. So, section 4, opening the Christ door. This is the ultimate objective. What actually happens when all this intense biological and acoustic work pays off? Well, by engaging in this protocol, you are escaping the active stress of the beta brainwave state, which, let's be honest, is where most of us live in a state of constant anxiety and problem solving, and you're dropping right into the theta frequency, vibrating between 4 and 8 hertz. The sources describe this theta door as the state where the membrane between the conscious mind and the voice of the spirit becomes so thin, you could literally push your finger through it. It is the frequency of visions, deep intuition, and profound divine encounter. When the temple is finally unsealed, the eschatological payoff here is immense. And it's not just about acquiring some sort of spiritual power. The reward, according to this framework, is receiving the white stone of true identity. It's about finally quieting the noise long enough to hear the Father's original whisper. You receive a hidden name, a private identity compressed into a single sound that the world's systems of trauma and performance just cannot touch. And ultimately, you receive the morning star, which the text describes not as a metaphor, but as Christ himself taking up residence in the purified biological temple. So, the crucial point we really need to drive home is this: the breath creates the conditions, the spirit does the rest. The breathing techniques, the fasting, the intense Hagah growl, none of this forces the hand of the divine. These physical protocols are simply clearing the seat at the table for the divine guest. You are actively removing the mineral blockages so that when the knock comes, the door can actually be opened. We've covered a lot of really intense, highly specific ground today, merging ancient scripture with modern neuroanatomy. According to these sources, you now hold the literal blueprints to your own biological temple, and you understand the physical barriers standing in the way of true spiritual encounters. So the only question left by this framework is this: now that you hold the blueprints to your own temple, will you let the stones remain, or will you use the hammer? Think about that, and I'll catch you on the next explainer.